Good morning and welcome to our Zoom with the HR MacMillan Space Centre. Today we're going to be talking about tides and how the tides in our town or in our city are affected by things really far away. So Rachel and Trish are going to take it away today.
Probably used to this by now, and I hope that you all are doing lovely this morning. It's nice and bright and sunny. And speaking of the sun, we're going to be talking about how things in space, things like the sun and our moon, affect water in the oceans here on Earth and give us our tides. Alrighty, so to understand tides, it's a bit confusing because actually tides has a lot to do with gravity, or this really fancy term that astronomers call tidal forces. But we're going to ignore that for now and just say that it's gravity that's affecting our tides and our oceans here on Earth. So let's do a little bit of a review of gravity so we understand what that force is and how it affects things. So here I have a giant. He is 160 kilometers tall, so really tall, taller than any person on Earth. And I have a little ball next to him. So what I want you to imagine is, well, we have this ball next to the feet of this giant, and if he drops the ball next to his feet, it'll be pulled towards the Earth. It'll be pulled towards the center of Earth. And that's because of the force of gravity. That's the same force that keeps your butts in your seats and doesn't let you fly off into space. Now let's imagine that at the head of the giant, we also have this ball, and we're dropping the ball now from the head of this giant. So all the way out there in space. Now, it's going to take the ball a little bit longer to fall towards the Earth, and that's because the further away you are from the Earth, the less and less the force or the strength of that force of gravity is. So if I were to imagine dropping this ball, this red ball, all the way out to where, let's say, the sun is, it would take a really long time for that ball to be pulled towards the Earth by the gravity of the Earth. So now we're learning that the force of gravity or the strength of gravity actually varies and gets smaller with the distance. So how far you are away from the center of your object. In this case, the center of our object is the center of the Earth. So we really care about how far you are away from the center of the Earth. Okay, so that's our review on gravity. So let's talk about how the tides are affected by the gravity of, let's say, our moon. So we're going to start with just our Earth-Moon system, and we'll consider and talk about the sun later. But first, let's talk about how our moon affects the water here on Earth. So let's start at the top. So here we have our little moon. Of course, this isn't to scale, but the moon is a little bit smaller than our Earth. And we see that the moon actually affects the water that is closest to the moon. And it pulls that water and makes it bulge out a little bit because of the force of gravity of the moon. Now remember I said that it's how close you are to the center of the object. For us, if we're considering the force of gravity of the moon, we're looking at the center of the moon. So it just so happens that this side of the Earth, the water on this side is closest to the center of our moon, so it feels the strongest force of gravity from our moon. Okay, so now let's look at our second picture. Now on our second picture, we see that now we're looking at the center of the Earth. The center of the Earth is closer to the center of the moon than the water on the far side or the other side of the Earth. So the Earth is actually pulled towards our moon with a force of gravity that's a little bit stronger. You can almost imagine that this little red line here is almost like a rope, and the moon is tugging on our Earth, pulling it towards the moon, and therefore we get this other bulge on the other side of the moon. And so it's crazy to think about the fact that, well, we only have the moon on one side, but it's actually creating bulges on both sides of our Earth, affecting the ocean, the water on our Earth. So it's crazy to think about because it's really, you think that there might only be one bulge because the moon is on one side, but really it's two bulges that we get because of this differences in the force of gravity. It's a little bit crazy to think about, but they do happen every day here on Earth. So now let's throw the sun into the equation. I still have that red line going across. We're still going to imagine that that's like a rope, but now let's think about what happens if the sun and the moon are working together. So when the sun and moon are working together, they're going to be in a straight line just like this. You can imagine that they're both almost playing a game of tug of war, where they're helping each other pull and tug on this rope that's tugging the water on our Earth, making these bulges. Now, when we have this perfect little lineup where they're all in this straight line, the sun, Earth, and moon, this happens at either a full or a new moon. So that's when we get the sun and the moon working together, tugging on this rope that forms a perfect straight line between all these three objects. Alrighty, so now what happens if they're not working together? Let's say that our moon wants to pull in a different direction and our sun is pulling in another direction. So instead of them working together, they're actually working against each other. And so now you see that instead of the two forces of gravity, one from the sun, one from the moon, working together, pulling that water and making it bulge, instead, they're almost canceling each other out. So now we see we have a little bit of a smaller bulge happening here on our Earth. Whereas if I go back, we had an even bigger bulge because the sun and the moon were working together, pulling the water together with the force of gravity. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what kind of animals you can see, because last week at the Space Center, we had a very special guest from Vancouver Aquarium. Her name was Catherine Poe, and she talked a little bit about what you can find when you go out and look in what we call intertidal pools. So these are these little pools that are left when the tide rises, all the water comes in, it rushes in towards the beach, fills up these little pools, and then the tide goes away, it gets lower, and then there's still water left in these little tidal pools. And little critters and creatures actually live in there. And what I learned from Catherine is that we can actually go and search for these little critters and interact with them and see their home, where they live, and kind of what they look like. And she shared some really helpful tips about some safe practices for when you go looking for these critters, and I wanted to share them with you today. And they are safe practices for both yourself and also for the creatures that live in these pools. And the first one being, watch where you step, because these little critters are everywhere. You might not see them, they might be hiding, and you might accidentally step on them. So please be careful when you go out searching for these cute little animals, because they are very, very small. They're very fragile, so just be careful where you step. And then the next one is, she told us that you could actually go and bring a bucket if you'd like, and go and place these critters that you find in the bucket with a little bit of water. But when you're transporting these creatures, you should make sure to be really gentle, because they are very fragile. They are living organisms, they're living animals. So please be careful when you're transporting them from their home to your bucket. Now, when you're done playing with the creatures and checking out what they look like and seeing how they are, make sure you put them back where you found them, because they have to return to their home. Even though you've brought them on a little vacation outside of their home, they have to go back where you found them. So either in the water where you found them, or maybe they were in the shade, because some of these creatures, like starfish, can't handle a lot of sun. So make sure that you're putting them back exactly where you found them so that they're comfortable and back at home. And the last tip I have for you is a very important one, and it's more so for you than it is for these little intertidal creatures. And that's to never turn your back towards the water. So you always, whenever you're exploring, especially along beaches, you want to make sure that you're working your way towards the water and that you're always facing the water, because we have things like tides, there's currents, water can swell up, and it's a little dangerous if you have your back towards the water. So you want to make sure that you're safe and making sure that you're heading towards the water and you're always facing the water. And yeah, so that brings us to the end of our tides talk. I'm going to quickly stop sharing my screen and let's chat a little bit about your wonders.
That's great, Rachel. And you're right. I had a really amazing chat with Catherine last week, and she was sharing some of those pictures that you showed about some of the creatures that are living on the beaches that we don't see when it's a high tide, but we do see when it's a low tide. So I want some of our people watching today, some of our friends, to think about, have they ever been to the beach when it's been a low tide, where the water is out far and you can walk on the sand or the rocks? And one of the things that Catherine shared with us and shared with Rachel is, if you're looking for these creatures, sometimes you need to pick up a rock. The favorite thing I was looking for when I go to the beach are small little crabs. Has anybody looked for crabs before at the beach? Have you found any before? They usually live under, yeah, perfect. Henry, you saw some before? So they usually live under the rocks. And what Catherine said last week was that you need to pick up the rock, have a look, and then put the rock back down exactly how you found it. Don't flip the rock over, or the crab will have a hard time finding its home again. So you pick it up and then put it back down the same way. So that was some good advice she gave us last week, Rachel.
That's so funny, Trisha, that you mentioned that crabs are your favorite thing to go look for, because that's actually the same thing that I was going to say, that I also really, yeah, I loved finding little crabs and putting them in a bucket and seeing them scurry about.
Absolutely. You can make some good observations, scientific observations, when you're looking at them. Very cool. Starfish are another really cool thing to find, especially when they come in different colors. I've seen a purple starfish before. I've seen an orange starfish, and I think, oh my goodness, which beautiful colors they come in. So that's cool too. Haley, back to you. Let's see if we have some wonders that kids have questions about the tides.
Yeah, so kids, you guys think of some questions that you might have about tides. Do any of you have one that you can think of right now? Because I have one I can ask if we don't have any. All right, you guys think about questions that you might have about things that Trish or Rachel have shared so far, or about what we're about to talk about. So you kind of explained how tides work, but as a kid, I always really only thought of tides when I thought of oceans. So I thought of like going to a beach and the tide would be out or the tide would come in, but I really only thought of oceans. Now, we lived on River Road in Langley for a long time, and River Road is on the river. So we got very familiar with the river being tides. So I'm going to share my screen for a sec just to show what I hear. Okay, so can you guys give me a nod if you can see the map here? Yeah, so Learn Fort Langley, obviously not all of you guys are from Fort Langley, but I live in Fort Langley, and I am trying to learn about my town and where I live. So because it's important to know our place and understand where we are. So what I noticed, because I lived way over here at the very edge of Langley on River Road, and we were on the Fraser River. And what we noticed is that the Fraser River has tides, but I always thought of tides as being an ocean thing, but the ocean, guys, is so far away. So I wonder if Trish and Rachel, if you could kind of explain kind of why the river is tidal too. Is that something that you can share with us?
Sure. If I had to take a best guess, I would say that it's because the Fraser River is, I want to say it's the longest river in British Columbia, I think, something like that. It starts in the Rocky Mountains and ends up near us here in Vancouver. And it is actually connected to a big body of water, and that's our ocean that's next to us. And so when we have gravitational forces, the force of gravity from things like our moon and our sun, it pulls on the body of water, a big one like our ocean. But because we have things like rivers and streams that are connected to big bodies of water like this, they also are affected by things like gravity and the changes in how much water or how high our tides are.
Awesome, thank you. And that's what I figured, is because it's connected to the ocean. So when the ocean water goes out, it kind of brings that down as well.
The further you get away from the ocean, Haley, up the Fraser River, if, for instance, you went all the way up to Kamloops or somewhere around that area, you would have less of a tidal effect, if almost no effect at all from the tides. So what's interesting up there is their river flow is affected by by the spring runoff. So in the spring, the river is really, really high. And in September, as fall comes, the river drops.
Right, so there's different things throughout the year that affect the amount of water in the rivers. So that would be a seasonal thing, really, and how much water there is from the seasons. And that is over a longer period of time. But when we're talking about tides, we're talking about a couple of tides a day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our place and our home changes throughout the day and throughout the seasons and throughout the years.
Absolutely.
So
all because the Earth rotates on its axis and orbits around the sun, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Now, Adrian, you are holding up something there. Do you want to tell us about what you're holding up there, kiddo?
It's the Rocky Mountains.
The Rocky Mountains. When Trish meant, or when they mentioned the Rocky Mountains, did you make a connection? Did you make a connection that made you think about your book? That's really cool.
Can you press the button?
Yeah, we can see it. What do you see in your picture?
Yeah. He wants to.
Oh, very cool.
What do you see?
I hear that. Is that a bear sound?
It's like a moose sound.
Oh, a moose sound.
And I see I see this. I see this.
Oh, yeah, very cool. Look at all the animals that are in that picture, my friend. I can see a mountain goat. I can see.
I'm telling you.
Okay.
There's like a mountain lion and
Yeah.
a mountain goat and an eagle six, and a bear.
I've seen a mountain goat before. And do you know
Blah,
mountain
blah,
goats?
blah.
Mountain goats really
Monkey
hang on
pie.
to the mountain.
Mountain goat.
You're so
and-
good.
That's very cool, Adrian. So I'm just turning your mic off for a sec, but that is very neat, kiddo. And it's interesting because you're talking about the Rocky Mountains, and it is connected because a lot of things on our Earth are really connected together and really are affected by what is happening in space. And that's why it's so cool that we've been able to talk with Rachel and Trish about the bigger picture space things, because that helps us understand our place here. Now, Riley, did you have something to say? I see you typed for us. You typed that you went to the beach once. Do you have any questions about tides at the beach? Or about the creatures that you see at the beach, bud?
Oh yes, I do.
What's your question?
So I know starfishes have eyes on the tentacles and mouths at the bottom, so they're sticking their nose to the part they're sticking to. But do they have teeth?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I think they must have teeth so that they can eat their food, because you're right. Their arms are suction cups, and that's how they hang on to the rock so much. So they have really good suction cups that hang on to the rock. And you're right, their mouth is kind of in the center of the starfish right here, so that they can eat algae and different things that come in contact with their mouth. So I don't really know 100% if they have teeth, but I'm betting they have some teeth to eat.
I think some starfish do, where their mouth is on the starfish, and it's a little different than the teeth that we have or like your dog has. They're more like spines. So like if you imagine a porcupine or a hedgehog, those little spines on their back, that's kind of what some starfish have instead of teeth, but they kind of function like teeth do.
Good answer, Rachel.
Awesome. So it's pretty cool that we get to talk to different experts in different fields about the things in our world. So Trish and Rachel have done a great job of telling us about space, but we also know that even if we're not an expert in a field, we can still have wonders, and we can still look up answers and find answers to our questions as well. Does anyone else have another question for today? I think we're a quiet bunch today. We're getting close to summertime. Oh, Adrian has a question. Adrian, what's your question? Oh, yes, it has to show us.
That's cool.
Cool, bud.
See the bottom?
I can see the bottom. Look at that big eagle flying across. I love some of the birds that are in that picture. Oh,
Adrian,
and there's the den.
can you show us the front of that book, Bud, so that we can see? Because that looks like a very cool book. Into the Wild.
I like that one.
Multi-layered exploration of a really wild planet. That is really cool. I think that my kids would love that book. I'm going to look into it. That is very cool.
It's my favorite book ever.
Yeah. So, Henry, you have a question. What's your question, Bud?
So, my question is, like, you said that the moon and that stuff affect the tides, but why don't they not affect it for the rivers? Like, why do they only affect it for, like, the ocean and that stuff?
Oh, that's a really good question, and one question that I had as well. Rachel, do you know the answer?
Sure. It's because when the moon and our sun pull on our Earth and pull on the near and the far side of our Earth, it is really easy for the moon, for example, to pull on a big body of water. So it's kind of the same reason why our moon doesn't bulge like the continent of North America or any land. It's kind of the same reason, because it's a lot easier to move big bodies of water and make those big bodies of water bulge out.
So the lakes aren't big enough, Henry, in order for the moon to pull all that water. They kind of have to have a really huge amount of water like the oceans have in order to get that effect.
So I'm wondering, and perhaps you know, are there any lakes that are big enough to be tidal, like any of the Great Lakes or any of those that are actually big enough bodies of water to have a tidal effect?
I think off the top of my head, there is, I think Pitt Lake has that, where it has almost just under a meter difference in the water between its high and low tide, but it's not to the same amount that you would see when you go to the ocean, where you see a bunch of water coming up onto the beach at high tide and then all the water receding or going away at low tide. So it's not quite the same kind of dramatic change that you would see on our beaches, but it still does happen a little bit. You just have to have a lot of water in one place.
Cool.
And lakes are so affected by the spring runoff and the rivers and that it kind of combats that effect of up and down kind of thing, because they have so much runoff.
Right, that makes sense. So we are coming up to summer, and so we haven't really nailed down yet what we're doing, but I was chatting with Rachel and Trish before about next week. I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, next week I think we're going to talk a little bit about what we can see when we're outside at nighttime this summer. Can we talk about that? About what is above our heads. So as we're camping or as we're exploring, they're going to give us hopefully some tips on what we are looking at, and perhaps some ideas of ways that we can find answers to the things we're wondering, or just what's above our head this summer. Does that sound like something we can do, guys?
Absolutely, because the weather, fingers crossed, is going to turn nice and sunny, and hopefully some of us can get out in camping. Even if it's camping in your backyard, you can still look up at the night sky.
Hey, I love camping.
Me too, Riley.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Rachel and Trish, for being with us here today. And I look forward to talking with you again next week. And then next week, we'll let everyone know about what our summer schedule is going to look like, because we're gonna cut back a little bit so that we can encourage everyone to be outside instead of being on screens. So I hope everyone has a great week, and thank you guys so much for being here with us today.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.